I am Gail Cormier, the Project Director of NASDAQ, the Family Center of Excellence. I'm happy to introduce our panelists for today. We have Pam Lanhart, who is the Executive Director of Thrive Family Recovery Resources. Pam will tell you a little more about herself when she begins the presentation. This webinar is being recorded. The resources, materials, and a link to the recording will be sent to you within the next 7 to 10 days. Michelle, are we recorded? At the end of the webinar, when you leave this meeting, you will be redirected to complete a short feedback survey using the link provided. This survey will help NASDAQ continuously improve our webinars, and it also fulfills our SAMHSA funding obligation to provide them with important data required by our contract. Please note, NASDAQ does not offer CEUs. You will, however, receive a certificate of completion after the survey is done. I would like to thank SAMHSA for allowing us to share this information with you today. And again, thank you for joining us. Now, just to set the mood for next month's Children's Mental Health Acceptance Activities, here is a special video. And please, we will put the link in to share, and you may share this with others if you want. But let's watch this great video. Are we watching the video? We are filled with technicalities today. I think we will move on to Pam. Pam, if we have time, we'll show the video at the end. Pam, if you would like to begin your presentation.
All right, I have my video on, my mute off, and we're just going to get to the correct page here. So thank you to all of you on staff at the National Federation of Families. I'm honored to have been asked to present today. I thank you for the work that you're doing nationally to lead the way in how families are guided and respond to substance use and mental health issues from all continuums of care and throughout the ages. So I really appreciate, again, the invite. We have a few learning objectives today. We're going to talk about how we can engage families into the process of recovery, specifically using the craft and invitation to change approach. We're going to learn about what a recurrence is, or what a return to use might look like, and how we can respond effectively. And then we're also going to learn how we can model and invite resilience into our families throughout the whole continuum of care. So just a little bit about me. I consider myself a person in long-term recovery from the effects of the disease of addiction. And what that means to me is that in spite of growing up with parents that had substance use disorder, having siblings that have been impacted by substance use and addiction and are now in recovery, and having a son who struggled with substance use disorder, was in recovery, and then unfortunately we lost him on October 23rd, 2021 to an accidental overdose after a one-day relapse. But in spite of all of that, what my recovery means to me is that I can show up. And I am able to show up for my family. I'm a wife of 42 years to my amazing husband, Paul. I'm a parent of 4 children and a grandparent of 10. I really am involved in our community. I run a organization called Thrive Family Recovery Resources. And it really is due to my own personal recovery that I'm able to continue to do this work. And one of the things that we'll share as well, many of the things we talk about can improve outcomes. We really can't guarantee what the outcomes will be. And one of the things that was part of my recovery is really learning that I can choose how I'm going to show up every single day so that regardless of what the outcome is, I don't suffer and die along with my loved one. Someone said to me one time, addiction may have taken your child, but don't give it the 2-for-1 special. And that was the best advice that I've ever given. Now, again, some of these practices do improve outcomes, and we're going to talk a little bit about data and statistics and some of those things as we continue on today. But it really, for me, was not about outcomes. What it was about for me was showing up in a way that honored my family, that honored my values, and that honored my spiritual and faith practices. So Thrive was founded in 2016, and it was really birthed out of the recovery community movement and the multiple pathways movement. So we provide family peer services to individuals that have been impacted by substance use. It could be family of origin or family of choice. We help families navigate resources. So we have people that are experts in particular in Minnesota, but even nationally, to direct people to vetted resources. We also offer craft and invitation to change support groups. I'll be talking about that later, but we're the largest network of those type of support groups in the country, specifically invitation to change. And then we do educational workshops. So I'm really honored and blessed, and I get to do this work every single day. So if you have questions about me or anything about that later, I think we are going to have a time of Q&A. So this quote, you have heard the first part of this quote many, many times. Hurt people, but we know that healed people heal people. And one of the analogies I like to share is part of Native American spirituality, because in their practices, the community is everything. The family is everything. And one of the things they talk about is that we can pass on generational trauma, but we can also pass on generational strengths, and we can leverage those strengths to heal. If you have a forest and that forest is really unhealthy, and you take one person out of the forest and get them well, or you take a tree out of the forest in that analogy, and you heal the tree and you get it back to health, but you put it back in the unhealthy forest, the tree is going to continue to stay sick. So what we are in the business of here is helping create a recovery-oriented family ecosystem. We want to create the healthy forest. And what we know is that when we work on our own healing and we adopt some of these practices, it overflows into everything in our lives, including our relationships with our loved ones. The second thing that is fundamental to all the work that we do is that healing happens in safe spaces. And so what does it mean to feel safe? Think about in your life, a safe person. Like it might be a friend, it might be a family member, it might be your boss. And what are those qualities and characteristics that draw you to them? Because when you're with them, that feels safe. And what we know is that when I feel safe, and I just did an intensive at Onsite a couple of weeks ago, and it was like the most incredible container, and I felt so safe. And there was a ton of healing that went on with the 50 people that participated in this program, because it was such a safe container. And so one of the things that we value highly in the work that we do is treating everyone we meet with unconditional positive regard. So you will hear in the work that we do and in the language that I use here today, we only use person-centered language. in the slide that we went through at the beginning, some of the practices that we want to elevate in this work are the language that we use. In our work, we don't call people addicts or alcoholics. We don't say words like clean or dirty. We don't use words like codependency or enabling, because that feels unsafe for people. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that today and how that goes into the work that we do and how that can really help you too. And even considering the fact that in most cases we're here, or most of you are here, because you are impacted by someone who is currently using substances or maybe in early recovery. And sometimes there's things that happen that really feel unsafe. So we really hope today, more than anything else, that you feel that sense of safety and that sense of belonging as we go through the next hour together, or 55 minutes. And that's the work that we do. We can't give what we don't experience ourselves. And so if I want to make someone else feel safe and connected, then I have to be safe and connected myself. So let's talk about what is recovery really. So the name of this talk is Recovery, Recurrence, and Resiliency. And we put them in some sort of order, but they're not linear, right? We need resilience from the moment we start looking for help, or we notice that someone in our home might be experiencing problems, or some of you maybe have even grown up in environments where you feel like you've had to learn how to be resilient. You kind of, get knocked down and get back up. And so we are going to talk about that later, but I want you to know that these particular 3 R's are not linear. We're talking about them in an order, but they're not particularly in any order. I need resiliency in order to activate my own recovery, in order to potentially help create a recovery-oriented family. And that's really what we're talking about here today. So recovery, as defined in Webster's dictionary, or Google, as the case may be, is a return to a normal state of health, mind, or strength. The action or process of regaining possession or control of something stolen or lost. Now, as it relates to family members and our own personal recovery, I don't know anyone who would suggest that in the process of someone else's substance use issues, you haven't lost many things. You may have lost your physical well-being. You may be in a state of emotional loss. Sometimes we're just in a state of grief, and we've lost the hopes and dreams that we've really believed would be a part of our lives long term. Maybe we've lost financial strength. So our recovery, or recovery in general, is regaining those things that we maybe have lost control of. What is the definition of substance use, or particularly addiction? It's continued use of a mind or mood-altering substance in spite of negative consequences. And so we've all experienced some negative consequences because of how we're impacted. And what we're here to do is think about how we might be able to regain some of the things that we've lost. And then, a normal health, mind, or strength. Now, I've heard that normal is just a setting on the dryer. And what really is normal? So one of the things we do in our person-centered approach that we take is, what does that mean to you? Where do you want to be at in your health, your well-being, your emotional state, your mind or strength? And we're going to talk a little bit about that more holistically in the last section, which is about resilience. So particularly this title of this talk focuses a little bit on craft and invitation to change. So I got asked to do this, and I'm really honored, because most people know that in our work, we practice these principles. They aren't particularly a recovery pathway, but they allow the creation of a recovery pathway for you that's customized and individual. The other thing is that it brings in some cognitive skills. So craft is really cognitive. It's tools and skills and work that we can do to sort of identify in our families what needs to be different, what needs to change, and then it equips the how-to. And that's a little bit different than some of the other recovery pathways that might be out there. CRAFT stands for Community Reinforcement and Family Training. CRAFT was developed back in the 1970s by Dr. Robert Myers. He did a CRAFT training this last week. I don't know if any of you on this call had the opportunity to attend that training. Robert's just a funny guy. He is a Vietnam vet. He's in his 70s now, so he's probably getting ready to retire, but this was based on work that he did. So he did a lot of work in the 70s that was informed by the community reinforcement approach, which is a specific approach that therapists use to help someone identify their need to change. And he started connecting dots and thought, if this really works in therapeutic settings, then perhaps it might work in the family system. So one of the studies that he did with his CRA approach was with adolescent boys that were sort of labeled as treatment resistant. They didn't want to go to treatment. They weren't interested in treatment. Many of them were unhoused. And the community reinforcement approach was 75% effective in helping those adolescent boys engage in some sort of help. And so when we talk about treatment, I don't like the word treatment because quite frankly, only 17% of people activate recovery through treatment. And I know it would seem like it was a lot more, but that means 87% of people use natural processes to stop drinking. And, you know, depending on how you really define treatment as clinical work. And so these were kids that moved the dial in their willingness to want to change through the community reinforcement approach. So CRAFT was developed as an intervention for wives that had substance using husbands. So think in terms of, and a lot of the work he did were in underserved and poor communities, West Virginia, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, the Appalachia region. And there were many men that worked in blue collar jobs in the mines. And there were a lot of women in those family systems that didn't have the means to leave their husbands. Maybe they had children, they didn't have jobs, they might not have had education. And so he started helping them to use the community reinforcement and family training approach, which we're going to talk a little bit more later about the specific components to CRAFT. But in that approach, and they found significant improvement, both in the relationship with the person that had the substance use disorder, their willingness to want to get some help, and then also in their sense of health and well-being themselves. When they were equipped, when they were educated, when they felt like they were empowered, and there were some things that they could do, they indicated a greater sense of well-being. And so in many of the studies, what they looked at was CRAFT as an intervention, and they compared it to families that worked, so that it's important to understand the context of the studies. And they're cited on Dr. Robert Myers' website, but the context was that the goal was to get the person to get help. The goal was to help them move towards recovery. And how do we engage the family in that process? So they looked at Al-Anon as a modality to help a person move towards change. They looked at a traditional intervention, such as the Johnson intervention method, which is what you might see on the TV show Intervention. And then they looked at CRAFT, the community reinforcement approach. So each individual was assigned a coach. And they were either coached on the 12-step principles, they did an intervention and they were coached on that process, or they did CRAFT. So at the end of a year, the data that came out was that 19% of the people that used Al-Anon reported that their loved one had engaged in help. 25% of the people that used an intervention indicated their person agreed to help, and 65% of the people that used the CRAFT approach were effective in helping their loved one engage in some sort of treatment. And there were multiple studies. So this wasn't just an one-off study. There were hundreds of people that were involved in these studies over 40 years. And, you know, so if you're a data nerd, this is what we call evidence-based. And evidence-based just means that it was studied and there is research and data that supports that it worked, and it worked really well. Now, when you look at this statistic, it's 65%, it's not 100%. And so one of the problems with any kind of cognitive work is that we can start to make it about the outcomes and a checklist. And so for anybody that's engaging in our services or potentially in our support groups, we really remind them that this is a process. It's not linear. It's still, you know, there's nothing that's guaranteed. There's nothing that works for everyone. And what most people are really looking for is a sense of well-being. I want to regain what I've lost. And that is true with any one of those modalities. So I really want to validate the fact that whether you are in some sort of support group or not, you know, really we want to get well ourselves, right? That's why we look towards these kind of engagement opportunities. So what is invitation to change? So there's this CRAFT thing, and sometimes people sort of talk about these two things interchangeably, but what is the invitation to change process? Well, what it did was it took everything a little bit of a step beyond what just straight CRAFT does, because CRAFT is pretty skills-based. So what about my sense of well-being? What about my way of being? What about my emotional wellness? So Center for Motivation and Change, many of you are familiar with it, or if you haven't heard of it, you may have heard of the book, Beyond Addiction, How Science and Kindness Help People Change. You know, people will often say they've never written, you know, a book about how to walk through this with your loved one. And that book is the closest thing to the, you know, manual or guidebook on how we can walk through this process of loving someone with substance use disorder. Jeff Foote and Carrie Wilkins wrote that book. They're both doctors. They worked for years in the CMC with the CRA approach, with the community reinforcement approach. And so CRAFT is part of the invitation to change process. It also adds two other modalities that are evidence-based. One is motivational interviewing. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go along here. And the other one is acceptance and commitment therapy. So they really all serve a very different and intentional component of the great work that the CMC does and that are part of the invitation to change. So if you were to take a IT or engage in an invitation to change support group, you would see components of all these different sort of processes or modalities: community reinforcement and family training, motivational interviewing, and acceptance and commitment therapy. So hopefully that gives you sort of context to some of the things that we're going to dive into here. So what is CRAFT and ITC, and what are some of the core assumptions? And I'm going to expound on these as we go through each one of these bullet points. So the first fundamental belief is that families matter. Families play the most important role in the treatment of any disease. And if you look at the social determinants of health, only 10% is clinical. The rest is all social environmental. So there's just a broad-based understanding of the fact that families matter. So I have a friend whose daughter had an eating disorder, and they were able to choose home-based therapy, HPT, for her treatment of eating disorder, because they realized that, you know, the family really orders our ideas about so many things, our lifestyle choices, our attitudes about things like physical wellness, eating, exercise, mental health. A lot of those things are passed on from generation to generation. And so in this case, they engaged the family into the process of the treatment of the eating disorder. They had clinicians that came in, they did a family assessment, and then the family had to commit to a very structured environment around the eating disorder treatment. They had to agree to eat at certain times of the day, maintain certain calorie intakes, have certain snacks, and then they all operated together. And we see this in most other diseases. If I present with diabetes, for example, when I present and I have a diabetic episode, the family's brought in and they're instructed on how the whole family can work together to create a lifestyle that supports the recovery of the disease of diabetes, right? And sometimes it's management of the disease in type 1, or maybe it's remission of the disease in type 2. But the family's engaged in that process. If my husband has a heart attack, they're going to call me into the ER and they're going to offer me information about how to treat the disease. However, substance use is really the only disease out there where the family is told that they should stay in their own hula hoop, that they should just let their person do their own recovery, and they aren't engaged in that process, which is not the way that any other disease is treated. And I think it's really important to note that there are certain conditionings, and I call it conditioning of our society, that, you know, I do my recovery over here, you do your recovery over here, and we never meet. And yet that is not the role of the family that's informed in any other disease model. So I'm going to just put that out there and call BS on it. The data that really is out there, when families are engaged in the recovery process at the end of a year, Judith Landau did some research on that. At the end of the year, 71% of those individuals that activated recovery were still in recovery. So that's a pretty big and significant number. When we work together, families get well. One size doesn't fit all. And that's a really important note here, that, you know, 4 years, and in the early recognition of my son's substance use disorder, we were directed to one place and one place only. And it was a one size fits all approach. But that didn't fit for me. There were things about that particular support group that just didn't feel right for me. Probably the primary one was that my son was 15 years old and I was not comfortable labeling him as an addict or an alcoholic. You know, I believe that names are important, that when we use certain language, it allows us to dehumanize another person. And there's a lot of dehumanizing that's going on in substance use in families. They're just you know, if their lips are moving, they're lying. They're just manipulators. And so, you know, we really want to honor the work that's going on out there and all pathways. And yet, for me, that didn't fit. And so what happened for me is my son was in a juvenile treatment court program, and they allowed us to do other things. And one of the things we did was dialectical behavioral therapy, which really gave me a foundation for some of the cognitive skills that I needed to learn how to self-regulate, to learn how to be mindful, to learn how to manage my distress, right? One of the other foundations of CRAFT and ITC is that substance use behaviors make sense. The substance use isn't the problem. And I know many of you are like, oh, come to my house and you'll see that it is. And I get it. I've been there. I understand. I grew up with parents that had alcohol use disorder. It was a huge problem for me. But the problem isn't the substances. The substances are the solution, whether it's, substances, whether it's processing addictions, whether it's eating disorders, it's a solution. The problem goes way deeper. The problem is a problem. The problem is an unmet need. Now, I know Gabor Mate talks a lot about trauma. Don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. Everybody has trauma. And I will say it is a pain point, but it may not be as big as what you might think about trauma. It may be something as simple as, I need to stay up late to get my paper done. And this pill helps me stay up late. I don't feel like I fit in. And this was my son's story. I don't feel like I fit in. So I can smoke this marijuana with the kids in my school, in the middle school bathroom, and boom, all of a sudden I've got instant friends. I feel physical pain. And when I feel this pain, if I take a drink or if I take this pill, I don't feel that pain anymore. I have anxiety and I need to be somewhere today, and this appointment is important. So if I take the edge off, I can get through this. And you know what? We all have behaviors that make sense to us. And with family members, we have our own behaviors that make sense. When I'm in pain, I go to control mode or telling mode, and that might feel like I have the illusion of doing something. So then I repeat the behavior. And these behaviors are reinforced. So it's basically disordered behaviors. I get an immediate reward, and that reward feels so good that I'm going to repeat the behavior. And that's really the idea behind substance use. I feel sad. I take this pill. It makes me feel happy. That worked really well for me. So I'm going to repeat the behavior. And of course, until it becomes problematic. People engage when they're treated compassionately and kindly. And I think this is true for all of us. If you think about a time when you were hurting, when you were struggling, and someone who came alongside of you with compassion and kindness, empathy, you probably felt safe enough to share with them what was happening. Or maybe in that safety, they were able to connect with you and move you to a place where you would consider the possibility of change. And there's a lot of data that supports this and the work that they're doing in European countries around harm reduction, safe use sites. They're not just so somebody can continue to use, they're so that people can get connected and move to a place of wellness. And this is another fundamental component of craft and ITC. This is hard, right? This is really, really hard. And for those of you who are in the middle of the hard right now, I want to honor that. And I want to validate that. We can't skip over the hard. And one of the ways we know that feels better is when we practice self-acceptance. I'm not going to live in the past. I'm not going to look to the future. I'm going to be in the moment. I'm going to feel it. I'm going to experience it. And then I'm going to move through it with intention. And of course, self-compassion. Kristen Neff is sort of that expert on self-compassion. She has a lot of work around that. There's a lot of information you can get on what that might look like. But I'm going to acknowledge my pain. And I'm going to take it easy on myself. I will not judge someone else. Therefore, I will not sit in judgment of myself. And one of the things that can happen, like I said, when we start to use skills and cognitive practices is we can make it a checklist. I've got to do this right. And if I don't get the results, then I'm not doing it right. I do get this with some of our families. Oh, I blew up last night and it was all wrong. Everything I did was wrong. And so we need to take a step back and understand that this journey isn't linear. Perfection is not the standard. And we're going to practice a moment where we give ourselves grace, because that's what we need to do. Every family member should be given agency in their decisions. Agency is the ability to self-regulate, to understand values and your values and how you want to align with your values so that you can move through this journey with intention rather than reaction. And then I have the ability to self-reflect and make repair if necessary. And then finally, there are many things that we can do, and family members feel empowered when they're educated and equipped with actionable solutions. All right, so going through this, the three main components of craft, the first one is helping with understanding. So when I can understand and put myself in another person's shoes, it helps me evoke empathy and compassion. So the three components are that behaviors make sense, which I mentioned earlier. You know, this is not, your loved one is not trying to, like, they're not doing this intentionally to make you mad, right? This isn't about you at all, actually. It really is that it's a reinforcement of behaviors, which we all have. No one size fits all, right? So there's multiple pathways to recovery. There's many pathways for each individual. Your situation might be unique, and it is. I think there are some things that are sort of, you know, there are some things that if every single person, if I asked you one question in here, you'd all raise your hands, right? Do you feel a sense of grief in substance use? Yes, like we all do. But my values are unique to me. And I'll just give you an example. We have worked a lot with some parents of our juvenile justice system, and most of them are in the Black and Brown communities. And what we hear often is, I can't pick my loved one out. And I don't know that I'd want to. And I was in this group and they told me I should do that. Or, you know, my sponsor quit on me because I wouldn't do what she told me to do. And in one particular case, I was having a really heart-to-heart with this mom. And she said, asking my son to leave my home right now could be a death sentence because he is African-American in the inner city. And so, we need to acknowledge that well, there are some, you know, general assumptions that we can make about substance use. Your situation is different. It is unique. Maybe, you know, we look at, like, I have families that come in and they've already lost one child to substance use. And there are certain things that they are just not willing to do. I can't do that. And we're going to work with that then. Okay. I think that makes sense. Your behaviors and your choices make sense as well. And then, of course, ambivalence is normal, which we kind of get to that in the return to use as well, how we respond to ambivalence. And I don't know if all of you understand the meaning of that word, but ambivalence is the awareness and knowledge that I can want two competing things at one time. I may want to get healthy and I may want to, you know, eat healthy. And I may want to not give up my peeps at Easter. You know, I really, really, really love my coffee. And maybe I am thinking, oh, you know, this is kind of a habit that I'd like to get rid of. But I have a whole routine around that coffee. Like, I wouldn't be just giving up the coffee. I'm giving up my morning routine. And so ambivalence is that idea that we can recognize that we need to change. And at the same time, there is difficulty making that change. We see this a lot in opiate use disorder. I know I need to stop. I mean, it's pretty apparent fairly quickly with people who become addicted to opiates that it's a real problem. And with fentanyl and the advent of fentanyl, it's very acute, very, very quickly. And all they need to do is try to withdraw one time, and they realize how painful it is. So I am completely serious about wanting to change this. I don't like the way I'm living, contrary to what, you know, the family's perception might be. They're not having fun. They're suffering. I do want to change. I am serious. And the minute I start to withdraw, I am in so much pain that, you know, 20 minutes later, I'm calling my dealer for more fentanyl, right? That's ambivalence. And we're working against some really, really powerful, serious drugs out on the streets these days. And it is acute. And therefore, your behaviors make sense because you do want to save your loved one's life. And it is really scary, really, really scary, right? And so, you know, that need to control, or that need to protect, or that need to operate out of fear, that makes sense. Of course. And is it helping, or is it causing harm? Is it creating an environment that supports continued use, or is it creating a family-oriented recovery ecosystem that supports recovery? The second component is helping with awareness. So I want to let me be who I want to be. You know, what are my values? We have values exercises that we do. You know, what do I want someone to say about me, about how I showed up? I remember, you know, my aha moments were like, I wanted to live out love, compassion, kindness. And if you would have asked me, do you love your child? I would have said, of course. That's a ludicrous question, but my behaviors were not aligned with that. Some of my behaviors were anything but loving. They were anything but compassionate. Because back then I believed that in order to move my son's dial on wanting change, I had to be confrontational. That I had to get him out of denial. Like that's what we were told. That is how we are conditioned. And I don't even get into the stages of change in this talk, but we don't even use the word denial in our work. They're just in pre-contemplation stage, and we can still validate their where they're at. We can validate the fact that they're not ready for change. And then, of course, we do set boundaries in order to live in our values and be safe. We're doing a boundaries workshop right now. What do I need in order to live in my values and to be safe and feel safe so that I can heal, so that my loved one can start to experience safety in our relationship? A new way to relate to pain, and that is the two sides of the coin. Like, I am in pain, and that makes sense. And that pain is usually because I want to help. And so I relate to the pain, but I also relate to love and what is going to be most helpful. And then, of course, practicing self-compassion, you know, giving yourself grace, understanding this journey isn't linear, understanding that if I am in pain or I do feel unsafe, it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to take a step back. It really is. However, one of my favorite quotes is, when you're tired, rest, don't quit. So perhaps practicing self-compassion is a way to allow you to heal and regenerate so that you can continue to stay in your values, so you can continue to show up. And maybe your goal is, I know right now that I really can't help my loved one, but I want to show up for the rest of my family. I want to show up for my other kids. I want to show up for my community. And then the third section is helping with action. So there's some actionable solutions that CRAFT offers that can be really, really, really helpful. Red light and green light moments. those communication skills. So this is kind of what it sounds like. I'm not going to charge in and tell someone what they need to do if they're in active use. That would not be a green light moment, right? I am not going to pile shame on somebody who's already in shame. I'm not going to try to have a productive conversation if we're in the middle of an argument. So the really cool thing about CRAFT is that I can learn how to create green light moments, right? And that's part of self-awareness. What's going on right now? What's going on in my environment? What's going on in my body? Am I activated or am I regulated? We want to get people back to their place of regulation. Is this productive to have this conversation right now? And if not, can we push that off and have it at a time that feels safer? Motivational interviewing, communication superpowers. For any of you who are familiar with MI, the OARS model, open-ended questions, affirmation, reflective, listening, summary, or I consider summary more validation or reflection. You know, I'm going to listen intentionally to hear, not to respond. It doesn't, it's not productive. I'm just going to tell you, like, if I create connection and conversation with my only intention to be to bring up my list of 10 treatment centers, they're going to smell you out every time. You know, like in disingenuine conversation is something that all of us can sense. So how am I actively listening? Am I able to reflect their emotion? Am I able to reflect what they've said? Can I validate them? We can always find things to validate and affirm. Validation doesn't mean I agree. It just means that I understand that your experience is what it is. And it may not be mine. And I'm going to try to understand it. And then in curious inquiry, right? So like, I'm trying to understand. Can you, I'm wondering. I'm curious. I'm trying to understand. Can you explain this? One of the ways I do this is with my daughter. I'll say, okay, the narrative that I've created, the story I've created in my head is this. Can you tell me what it really is? Right. So there's many different ways to bring out the communication superpowers that are involved with, and some of you, it might be LEAP, it might be OARS, it might be in CRAFT, an invitation to change. It's called the love skill, listening, open-ended questions, validation. And we always want to gain consent. So like, are you just venting or are you asking my opinion? Right? Never give advice, never, unless they ask, or you offer the ability for them to give permission. Increasing behaviors by positive reinforcement in the recovery world is called contingency management. And this is really prevalent in the mental health work that many of you do, but it's every time I see a behavior that I want to reinforce or that I would like to see repeated, I'm going to reward it. That could be a verbal reward. It could be leaning in. It could be touch. It could be financial reward, such as, we're going to put every day that you're sober for a month, we're going to put $1 in the bank. And at the end of the month, you can buy a new video game, whatever it is. I mean, there's many different ways to do this. I know some of you will be like, that's like bribing, but really it is. Okay, so we live in a world where people will stay up until 3 o'clock in the morning playing Call of Duty or Minecraft just so they can get to the next level to get a new piece of living room furniture. So it works. We have gamified life, and contingency management is, I'm going to ping your brain and give you a dopamine hit every time you do something that we would like to see reinforced, right? And they might be agreements. Maybe you agree together that this is an area that you're going to be reinforced. You're competing with the dopamine pings that substance use gives them. And so what this does is it creates neural pathways that are new and different in the individual substance user's brain. And it also, you guys, creates new neural pathways for me as the family member, because now I'm going down the road of looking for the good instead of the bad, looking for the success instead of the failure. And then, of course, decreasing negative behaviors by allowing for natural consequences. We don't use the word enabling, but we don't want to protect, right? We don't want to protect. And that gets really hard when you're experiencing loss. You know, they're going to lose their job, and it feels really hard to not call in for them because I know that they're going to lose their job. They're going to lose their vehicle. And that feels really hard because right now they're living out of their vehicle. And those natural consequences, sometimes that's where we can get into the mix in a negative way where we're protecting them and it prolongs the substance use. And then communicating limits with compassion and kindness. Say what you mean, but don't say it mean. In our process, we call it the 4 F's of setting boundaries. And simply put, it's foundation, facts, feelings, and follow through. You know, I love you. And when this happened the other day, this is how it made me feel. And what I need is this, right? And I can do that with kindness. I don't have to be mean. I don't have to be confrontational. A boundary doesn't have to be a cutoff or a kick out, right? A boundary allows us to be safe so that we can love our person well. Now, we know that sometimes, in spite of our best efforts, so we've been working on craft and it's working and they're in treatment or they've been sober for a little while and there's a return to use. Now, I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable here. And I'm going to tell you something that is a gift that I was given, and it makes me really emotional to talk about this. So my son was 3 years in recovery, and not that he didn't have a little blip a couple times, but he had been living out in Colorado, living his best life. He climbed mountains for his recovery. He had a lovely girlfriend who he was intending to marry, and he had a job, right? And he was making a life for himself. And on October 22nd, he went back out. And he had one day. And in 24 hours, he was dead. And what I have is the gift of knowing that how I reacted and responded to that was nothing regretful. I have the gift of text messages and phone calls, and we have the gift that even goes back way before that of treatment use, treatment work and journals. And he spoke at meetings where we were able to have open conversations. So in his active use, he was not shamed. He was not blamed. We didn't cut him off. We didn't tell him, you know, don't call me if you know, don't call me until you're sober, right? So we can, this hurts. It hurts when your person returns to use. And it's common in the disease of addiction, right? 40% have a flare up or a return to use. And there's a few things that really, really help. And, you know, they have guided all of our work. And the first one is that language matters. You know, they already know, they know that you know. So we don't have to shame them or blame them, right? Like, great, now you're starting all over again. You might as well just turn in all those chips. Back at day one, great, 3 years of recovery, you know, down the drain, right? And honestly, you guys, I understand you telling yourself those messages. Just don't put them on your person. I know you feel that way. I get it. You're human. You're human. Like, we feel pain. And it's freaking scary right now because a return to use can be death very quickly. And our go-to mode is to, protect ourselves, right? And that makes sense. Your behavior makes sense. We just have to be careful not to put that on our person, because the more we respond with compassion, the quicker that relapse or that return to use will correct itself, right? And again, remember, ambivalence is normal. Ambivalence is normal. Just repeat. Ambivalence is normal. They might be totally sincere about tomorrow morning. I mean, my son told his friend the night that he died, he saved his friend with naloxone, right? And they took him to the hospital and they said, and my son said, I will pick you up in the morning. I'll get you to detox. And tomorrow's a new day. He told his girlfriend he'll get back on track on Saturday. He didn't make it to Saturday, but he was sincere. And we know he was sincere. Nobody wants to do this. And I know from talking to many, many, many people in recovery that they all know they're not having fun and they know they need to stop, right? So just remember that. And when we understand ambivalence is normal, we can respond with compassion, with empathy. They are suffering, you guys. And this probably caught them by surprise. So many times a return to use is it's just a moment, a second decision that is not even well thought out. And the next thing they're off and running, because we know that some of these drugs have really deep tentacles. And we have muscle memory. And I ran marathons. The last marathon I ran was 2009. I could tell you right now, I could go out and run 10 miles. Even without running for however many years, because my body and my brain know how to do it. And they remember, there's this sort of, what's the word? Romanticizing, right? That first use, and there's risk and reward. I know there's a risk. I know I may be playing Russian roulette here, but I've overdosed 7 times before, and I made it. I'm still alive. In my son's case, he had never overdosed, so he thought that he knew how to use safe, right? But he knew, and it's not starting over. And I really want to encourage you all. Some of you have come out of the 12 steps, and so there is sort of this, day one kind of thing. And I really want to encourage you to sort of think differently about this as you're working with your loved one, that we're not starting over. It's a learning process. We're building on the things that we've gained in our recovery, and kind of suggesting that can be very shame-based. And again, practicing self-compassion, it always goes back to, of course, this hurts. Of course, this is hard. And our responses do matter. Our responses make such a difference. And then, of course, harm reduction. How can I keep my person alive? In this episode of use, I want to make sure they have naloxone. I want to, if appropriate, make sure they have fentanyl test strips. And then we want to go back to the basics of craft. And now we're going to finish up with resiliency. I promise I'll only take about 5 more minutes, because this is something that is important through this whole process. What is resiliency? It's the capacity to withstand and recover quickly, right? It's the ability to spring back from the setback. And so, of course, again, this is not linear. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I grew up in a family where we had substance use in my family, and I learned very early on how to be resilient. Now, some people would practice this by not feeling their emotions. I can get up and bootstrap this because I'm tough. And I would think that after a while, you're going to have an emotional breakdown. You are not going to be able to withstand all of the difficulties that come with this without understanding resilience. So what does that look like for me as a person? And I use the 8 dimensions of wellness as a model here. So there are identified by SAMHSA 8 areas that are the scaffolding that we need in our lives in order to maintain our own health and well-being. So when I am emotionally well, when I have that as part of my practices, and I am connected to myself emotionally, if I have a setback, I can get back on track. Or, social, if I have a strong community, if I have physical routines and physical practices. And one thing I will say, and I'm going to go to the next slide here, but what I will tell you is that because I had all of these areas well balanced in my life, when my son died, I was able to come back from that. Did I take a step back for a little while to like not want to cry every day? Absolutely. But was I able to show up shortly after my son died? Yes. And you know why it was? Because I had all of these areas of wellness shored up in my own life. Resiliency is, is my home safe? If my home is safe, then I can make decisions with intention according to my values. Do I have the components of health and well-being in my life? Mental well-being. Do I have a therapist? Have I done work around my own trauma? Am I emotionally well? Are you shored up emotionally? Do I have spiritual practices in my life? This doesn't mean religion. Spirituality could be, I take a yoga class, I meditate, I practice guided meditation, I listen to, certain meditations before I go to bed at night. Physical, what are the physical practices that I have every day? I had a routine. My routine was I walked 4 times a week, an hour a day. So when my son died, I was able to continue practicing that routine. Do I take care of myself nutritionally? Am I drinking water? Am I eating well? Do I have other physical practices in my life? Am I taking my medications that help my mental well-being and my physical well-being? Because when I have those things in place, then when I have those routines, I call it, routines and rituals, right? So I knew I do the same thing every morning. I get up, I come downstairs, I open my eyes, I make my cup of coffee, I drink my water before I drink my coffee, I sit on my chair, I journal, I write. I had creative practices, creative outlets. Those are my emotional well-being, those creative things that you do. Those things have taken me through every single hardship in my life. I can be resilient when I have routines and rituals and practices that are so constant that when something comes up, it doesn't knock me over. And then do I have a strong community? Oh, I am so grateful. My community showed up for me, right? Your support groups, your church groups, your CrossFit group, your art group, all of those are your community. Maybe it is your family, right? Those are your community. Those are the people that you will need to lean on when you have a setback or when your person experiences a setback. And finally, a sense of purpose. I had a strong sense of purpose throughout this whole thing. I had a vision. My vision was to create this holistic organization where I could help other families. and I was on mission. And maybe your purpose isn't to work in this field. Maybe your purpose is different. Maybe your purpose is to give back in your community and volunteer in some way. Maybe with your job, you have a strong sense of purpose. Maybe you want to take a class so that you can teach the class. But when we have a strong sense of our own individual purpose, then when something happens with someone in my family, I don't lose sight of that. I still have this intrinsic value that has been created around the things that I know that I am meant to be doing in my life. Right? So those are those components of resilience that have allowed me to bounce back from the most difficult circumstances that I have ever experienced. And I believe that if we have these components in our lives, that we can come back from anything, that there is nothing. I mean, truly, some people would argue that the loss of a child is about the worst thing you could experience. And I am sitting here today able to show up and do my work because of the resilience that I have in my life, because of these practices. So with that, I'm going to end. I think we're at about 2:09, so we have 20 minutes. There's some follow-ups and next steps. So I'm going to stop talking, and Gail, I'll turn it back over to you.
Pam, this was wonderful. I really can't thank you enough for being here today. And we have lots and lots of questions. I hope we can get to as many as possible. The first up is Sabrina. She's had her hand up for quite a long time. I'm going to take her off of mute so she can ask the question herself. Sabrina, you're up. Sabrina?
I'm sorry, I didn't know my hand was up. I apologize.
Well, in that case, do you have a question?
I do not, but thank you. I'm just listening intently.
All right, the next one is Allison. Allison, would you like to ask the question?
Oh, there we go. Did that work?
Yeah, you could even put your camera on if you'd like.
Nope. I work from home, so I'm looking pretty ragged.
Just ask your question. It's totally fine.
So my question was just, you threw out the statement around boundaries with the 4 F's that went with it, which was, and I don't know if I wrote this down right, but it was foundation, facts, feelings, and follow through. I would just love to hear more with that, because I feel like boundaries are huge in so many aspects of life, and that seems like a great tactic to kind of teach back to clients.
Yeah, and I don't know if I can do this. I hope I can. I might be breaking a rule, but we're actually right in the middle of a boundaries workshop. If I'm allowed, I can put that link in the chat box. And we're going to be talking about these actual 4 F's next Tuesday. But the foundation is that connection, right? So no correction without connection. And we don't have a right to set a boundary if we don't have a relationship with that person. So of course we want to really make sure that we're fostering connection before we even think about setting boundaries. And then, so the first F is that foundation. The second F is the facts, which are very specific. Like you guys, I'm going to date myself, Dragnet, right? Just the facts, ma'am. So we're not going to use words like always or never. We're going to state a particular situation. Yesterday, when you said this, I felt dehumanized. Or the other day, when you called me 14 times and I was at work, I was unable to do my job well. And being able to show up at work is really important to me. So like I was feeling like I was not doing a good job and I was feeling frustrated in that moment. So did you hear the fact and the follow through, or the feeling? And then, you know, Brene Brown in Atlas of the Heart, there's 186 feelings and we use 3. So you can expand your vocabulary on that. And then the follow through is what I'm willing to do. and what I'm not willing to do. So you know what? I know you want to connect every day. So what I'm willing to do is answer my phone at 5:15 when I'm driving on the way home. What I'm not willing to do is answer the phone during work. So from now on, I'm going to shut off my ringer so that I can do my job and show up. Right. So that just was an example of the steps of the 4 F's.
That
That's
is
great.
bad. Thank you. Sorry, Allison, for cutting you off. That is fabulous. Also, could you speak? There's a lot of questions about harm reduction. Can you speak about that a little
Well,
bit more?
yeah, harm reduction is a whole hour-and-a-half seminar on its own, and we're actually hosting a free virtual naloxone training nationally on Sunday night. So again, I might be able to, give you a way to learn about naloxone, and now it's over the counter. It's available at CVS pharmacies, but harm reduction is more than just fentanyl test strips and naloxone, although that is a huge part of it. But in my opinion, harm reduction is I'm going to acknowledge and validate where you're at in your change process right now. So, I hear you. I can see that you're not ready to make a change, and I understand. And knowing that you're not quite ready or you're not there right now, how can we make sure that you stay alive? Dead people don't recover, right? So those things might be, and now in some states, we're adding xylazine test strips to that repertoire. It might be, here's the clinic that you can go to get, HIV testing, clean, sterile needles, fentanyl test strips. So it might be, I can't give you money for food, but I might be able to direct you to the places that do offer meals every week. That's a form of harm reduction. Maybe it's, you know what, I don't know that it feels really safe for you to be in my house right now, but I will take you to the shelter. I will make sure that you are sheltered. I will make sure that you do have food. I will treat you humanely. And that really, to me, is what defines harm reduction. Is I'm going to value you as a human being and where you're at in your process. And I'm going to make sure that you're safe and that you stay alive.
Pam, this may contribute to what you just said, but we have a parent here who said her son just returned this morning after 90 days, and he is already using again and arguing again, and she is very exhausted. What
Mhm.
you just described, are those some of the tools you would suggest she would use?
Yeah. So there's a few things there. That's first of all, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you're going through that, because when our loved one goes to treatment, we hope that when they come home, they will choose to stay in recovery. And there's some steps you could take there. There could be some interim boundaries. I acknowledge that you're using, and one of the boundaries is that you cannot use in our home. So that could be the 4 F's of that. It could be, I having a conversation. I love you, and I had a lot of hope for us as a family, and I'm willing to do the work if you want to meet on a regular basis. And right now, maybe what I can offer you is this option to go to sober living, and I might help support that financially, because I'm realizing that being here at home really isn't the best choice for you. So again, that's where there's sort of that person-centered approach, which could be a number of different things, but at the core of it all is I see you, and I see that you are not at the place where you're willing to engage in recovery. So what could be some options here to keep you safe and alive, and to keep our home safe? So it's not just about them either. It's how can I stay safe in all of this as well?
And self-care, of course.
Great.
Also, if you want to learn more about harm reduction. NASDAQ has done a few webinars and will be putting out a training module later in the year. But if you go to the events section and look at some of our past webinars, we have a couple of really good ones, just as good as this one with Pam, with other parents talking about harm reduction. And you may find some positive or helpful information in those too. We have so many questions here, Pam. People are very, very interested. How do the families know where and how to even begin in trying to be part of the solution when they may have felt they were to blame in the first place?
Okay, we're all complicit in some way, and we're all able to move out of that place, right? So I brought in generational trauma. When my son started using, I was very overreactive, right? And I think that there are things, we are not perfect, we are human, right? We are human. And so it's interesting because when I did this intensive, for every person who did life one way, there was somebody that did it a different way, and both ended with the same result, which was that their child died. And so here's the thing, and many people end up with the same result, that their child lived. So we really don't have that much power. Like, we don't have the power to make someone good or bad. I often cite my sister who used substances, my niece, she's finally in recovery at 58. She was kind of a hot mess as a parent, and she has a daughter who graduated magna cum laude, and my son is not alive. So, yes, we're all human, and so we all cause harm, but we can all repair the harm, right? And we don't have that much power. We don't have the power of life and death, because there's still choices that everyone makes in all of that. So I would suggest and submit to you, what choice are you going to make today?
Thank you,
We're
Pam.
going to practice self-compassion from the past. We're going to move forward in the moment, and we're going to start today to activate the health and well-being to create an environment that supports recovery. And if you need to work through some of that, I would suggest internal family systems therapy and trauma therapy, because sometimes you do have a history that might have caused harm, and you did the best you could. You did the best you could in that moment. I did the best I knew how to do in that moment. And you can move out of that with intention by getting the help that you need today.
Thank you, Pam. Patricia Martinez has a question for you. I have unmuted Patricia, so Patricia, feel free to ask a question. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Gail. No, actually, I didn't have a question. I was just more impressed and wanted to thank you, Pam. What an amazing session. I cannot even, I'm speechless as to how I feel. Really, really amazing. Your experience as a professional, but also your human piece that you put into it. It's like, I have not seen anything so well done. So no, thank you. It was not a question, but more a kudos to what you have given us in this hour and a half. Thank you both.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Patricia. That was very kind. We have several highly complimentary quotes here from parents who are all saying that they have experienced what you experienced. We have a parent who said, such powerful testimony. This training is outstanding. It made me cry. And then another one that said almost exactly the same thing. And it said, thank you very much. This video will also be on our website for everyone to watch again if you'd like. And all the resources that Pam has mentioned will be sent in a follow-up email. Let's see, I'm looking to see there's so many duplicate questions here. Let me ask one last question here. Hearing ambivalence is normal and not static state of dysfunction. Oh, hearing that ambivalence is normal and not a state of dysfunction. This is so refreshing. Thank you for sharing your personal stories to enlighten us caregivers. Do you have any final words?
Oh, wow. I think kind of what I want to re-echo the idea that you're all doing the best you can. We're all doing the best we can. And I always challenge myself to imagine that I can do better. I have a daughter who has struggled with mental health issues. She's in recovery. And when I know better, I do better. And so I think that we want to give ourselves permission to acknowledge and validate the pain and where we've come from. And then the hope, right? I want to end with that word hope. And more than anything, I just hope I inspire you to believe that you can do something different today that can change the potential course of your life and your loved one's life. And there is always hope. And so just know that. And I really, again, I'm honored to have been able to be a part of this discussion. I thank you guys for inviting me, and for all of you parents out there, just remember that it is truly one small step at a time. And y'all are strong. You're strong. And okay, sorry, one other really quick thing. It goes back to purpose, and here's what I'm going to tell you. I was chosen to be my son's mother. I was chosen for that job. And I don't know why I only got to do that for 24 years, but it was such an honor. It was such an honor. And you were chosen to be your child's mother or your child's father. And please step into that. Right? It doesn't feel like it in the middle of the hard, but you are the person that is most equipped to love and help your loved one. And I hope that you embrace that and believe that today.
Thank you, Pam. We have so many questions we couldn't get to, but we'll try to answer some of them in a follow-up email as well. We're going to try again to see if we can show the short video, because next month is Mental Health Acceptance Month, and we're excited. And the video is something we're very proud of to get us all in the mood of mental health acceptance. So let's cross our fingers and see if it works. I see it. Is the sound on? Yes. I'm so glad we were able to see that video. Thank you, Luchelle. Thank you all for being here. Pam, again, this was very heartfelt and very informative, and I can't thank you enough. A special thanks goes to Dr. Linda Goggin, NAFTAC Principal Investigator and the Federation of Families Executive Director, and for all the NASDAQ team for helping us run today's event. Thank you, everyone. We hope that we see you next month. And remember, May is Mental Health Acceptance Month. Awareness just isn't enough. As you leave today, you will be directed to a survey. We kindly ask that you fill out the survey, and once you do, you'll get your certificate of attendance. Both should pop up after each other. So please, please fill out that survey. We'll leave this Zoom up for 5 additional minutes, so you'll have time to exit on your own, fill out the survey, and then get your certificate. If when I close the Zoom and if you're still in here, you will not be able to fill out the survey and get the certificate. So please exit on your own, and we hope to see you next month. And thank you, Pam. Pam, please, this was awesome. You don't have to stay. We'll see you in debrief. Again, please exit on your own and fill out the survey when the link takes you there. We will keep the Zoom up until 3:35.